Can I call my mom to help me answer that? Seems innocent enough for a job interview question. Until you realize the position was for NASA's rocket engineering team. The scary part, that person actually got hired somewhere else. 1. Sarah walked into the interview confident she'd nailed her research. Then she opened her mouth. "I'm so excited to work for Microsoft," she beamed. The interviewer's eyebrows shot up. They worked at Apple. The silence that followed could have powered a small city for weeks. 2. Sarah walked into TechFlow Solutions and confidently introduced herself to the hiring manager. "Thanks for meeting with me today about this position at DataStream Industries," she said with a bright smile. The interviewer's face immediately shifted. "Actually, this is TechFlow Solutions. We're the company you applied to work for." Sarah's cheeks turned red as she realized her mistake. She had mixed up two different interviews scheduled for the same week. Instead of gracefully recovering, she made it worse by asking, "Oh right, so what exactly does TechFlow do again?" The hiring manager explained they create project management software for small businesses. Sarah nodded enthusiastically and responded, "That's awesome. I love working with big corporate clients." Wrong again. The interview continued downhill from there, with Sarah clearly having no idea what company she was actually sitting in or what job she was trying to get. 3. The candidate sat across from the hiring manager, confidently explaining why they'd be perfect for this marketing role. Everything seemed normal until they casually mentioned how excited they were about the accounting opportunities ahead. The interviewer's confused expression said it all. This person had no clue what job they were actually applying for, despite sitting in the interview room for 20 minutes already. 4. Sarah walked into the interview confident and ready. The hiring manager smiled and asked about her interest in their marketing position. Without missing a beat, Sarah launched into a passionate speech about her love for accounting and numbers. The confused silence that followed was deafening and unforgettable. 5. Sarah walked into the tech startup interview confidently, shook hands with the hiring manager, and immediately said, "I'm so excited to work at Google." The interviewer politely corrected her. She laughed it off, then asked what products they actually sold. The awkwardness was just beginning. 6. Sarah confidently walked into the tech startup interview, ready to impress. When asked about her time management skills, she grinned and said something that made the hiring manager's jaw drop. "Oh, I'm always late to everything. I think it's actually pretty cool because it shows I'm relaxed and don't stress about small stuff like punctuality." The interviewer stared blankly as Sarah continued her bizarre defense of chronic tardiness. She laughed about missing important client meetings at her previous job. "People take time way too seriously," she explained, leaning back in her chair like she was hanging out with friends instead of interviewing for a professional position. But wait, it gets worse. Sarah actually bragged about showing up 30 minutes late to team presentations. She thought her casual attitude towards schedules made her seem laid back and fun to work with. The hiring manager watched in disbelief as this candidate turned one of the most basic workplace expectations into a twisted badge of honor. Then came the part that sealed her fate. Sarah openly mocked companies that enforce punctuality rules, calling them uptight and boring. She suggested that real creativity happens when people aren't worried about clocks. The interviewer realized they were dealing with someone who fundamentally misunderstood professional responsibility. What Sarah didn't grasp was simple. Being late isn't rebellious or cool, it's disrespectful to everyone else's time. Her attitude screamed that she valued her own convenience over team commitments. The interview ended quickly, and Sarah never understood why she didn't get a call back. 7. Sarah walked into the tech startup wearing a crisp blazer and confident smile. The interviewer asked about her interest in their AI solutions company. Without missing a beat, she launched into a passionate speech about how excited she was to work for their innovative food delivery platform. The room fell silent. The hiring manager blinked twice, then gently corrected her. Sarah's face turned crimson as she realized she'd just confused them with the company next door. But here's the kicker. She doubled down, insisting she'd researched thoroughly and asking if they were planning to pivot into food services soon. 8. Marcus walked into his dream job interview at Google and immediately asked, "So how much are you guys paying?" The hiring manager blinked twice. Before she could even introduce herself or explain the role, Marcus was already calculating his potential salary and demanding specifics about the compensation package. The interviewer tried redirecting the conversation toward his qualifications and interest in the position. Marcus wasn't having it. He interrupted her mid-sentence to clarify whether the salary was negotiable and if there were signing bonuses involved. When she mentioned they'd discuss compensation, after reviewing his fit for the role, he actually laughed. "Look, I'm not wasting time talking about work stuff if the money isn't right," Marcus declared confidently. He pulled out his phone and started showing her screenshots of salary websites, pointing to numbers he'd researched. The woman across from him looked genuinely confused by his approach. Then things got worse. Marcus began bragging about how he'd negotiated a higher starting salary at his previous job, even though he'd been fired after 3 months. He claimed other companies were offering him more money and suggested Google needed to step up their game to compete for his talents. The interview lasted exactly 12 minutes. Marcus never learned what the actual job involved, what team he'd join, or what projects he'd work on. He walked out convinced he'd impressed them with his business savvy and negotiation skills, completely oblivious to their horrified expressions. 9. Sarah walked into the tech startup's sleek office, confidence radiating from every step. The interviewer smiled warmly and asked about her interest in their innovative cloud storage solutions. Without missing a beat, Sarah launched into an enthusiastic speech about how much she loved their social media marketing platform. The interviewer's face went blank. "We don't do social media marketing," came the awkward response. Sarah doubled down, explaining how she'd been following their Instagram campaigns for months. The silence that followed could have powered their actual cloud servers for a week. Then came the kicker. She asked what products they actually sold. The interviewer had to explain their entire business model to someone who'd supposedly researched them thoroughly. 10. Marcus walked into his interview at TechFlow Solutions and confidently introduced himself as excited to work at DataSync Industries. The hiring manager politely corrected him twice. Marcus just smiled and kept calling it DataSync. When asked why he wanted to work there, he enthusiastically described DataSync's amazing cloud services, which TechFlow doesn't even offer. 11. Sarah walked into the tech company interview completely confident. When asked about her biggest weakness, she paused for exactly 3 seconds. Then she delivered the most cringe-worthy answer possible. "Honestly, I don't have any weaknesses. I'm basically perfect at everything I do." The interviewer's eyebrows shot up like rockets. But Sarah wasn't done yet. She leaned back in her chair with a smug smile and continued her train wreck. "I mean, I've thought about this question before, and I genuinely can't think of a single thing I need to improve on." "Well, that's one way to torpedo your chances." The interviewer tried to give her another shot, asking if there were any skills she'd like to develop. Sarah doubled down. "Nope, I'm good. Maybe other people need development, but I'm already where I need to be." Then came the kicker. When pressed one more time about areas for growth, Sarah actually laughed. She said the whole concept of self-improvement was overrated and that companies should focus on finding people who are already perfect instead of trying to fix broken employees. The interview ended 5 minutes later. Sarah walked out thinking she'd nailed it, completely oblivious to the fact that she'd just demonstrated her biggest weakness of all, zero self-awareness and an ego the size of Texas. 12. Sarah walked into the marketing firm confident and ready. The interviewer asked about her experience with their main product line. She stared blankly for 15 seconds. Then came the crushing admission, "I actually have no idea what you guys sell here." The hiring manager's pen stopped moving completely. 13. The candidate stared blankly when asked about KPIs in their potential role. They nodded confidently, then admitted they thought it meant keep people interested. When the interviewer mentioned B2B sales, they asked if that stood for business to business, like they'd discovered something revolutionary. The confusion deepened when discussing quarterly reports. They assumed it meant working only 3 months per year. Basic industry terminology became a foreign language, turning a straightforward conversation into an awkward guessing game that nobody wanted to play. 14. Sarah walked into the interview confident and ready. But confidence turned into something else entirely when she started complimenting the interviewer's beautiful eyes and asking if they were single. The hiring manager's face went from professional to uncomfortable in seconds. Sarah didn't stop there, though. She suggested they grab drinks after the interview to get to know each other better. The poor interviewer tried redirecting the conversation back to job qualifications. Sarah responded by leaning forward and saying the company seemed like a fun place to find romance. Well, that meeting ended faster than expected. Then there's the case of Mike, who decided pickup lines were appropriate interview material. He told the female interviewer she must be tired because she'd been running through his mind all day. The silence that followed was deafening. Mike genuinely thought charm would land him the job, but here's the weird part. These people aren't necessarily bad at their jobs. They just completely misread the professional atmosphere. Romance belongs in dating apps, not conference rooms. Yet some candidates blur those lines so badly that HR departments have stories for years. 15. Marcus walked into the interview and delivered the ultimate career killer. Honestly, I really hate working. The hiring manager's pen stopped mid-sentence, but Marcus wasn't done. He explained how work was just about money, nothing else mattered, and he'd probably retire soon anyway if he won the lottery. Most people try to hide their lack of enthusiasm, not Marcus. He doubled down on his anti-work philosophy like he was auditioning for a documentary about workplace apathy. I mean, who actually enjoys getting up early and doing stuff for 8 hours? He asked, genuinely puzzled by the concept of job satisfaction. The interviewer asked about his motivation for applying. Marcus shrugged and said he needed rent money, but ideally he'd just stay home and play video games all day. He even laughed about how he'd called in sick to his last job just because it was sunny outside. Work is basically the opposite of fun, right? Then came the real kicker. Marcus admitted he'd been Googling how to retire at 25 inches during his lunch breaks at previous jobs. He shared his master plan to work just long enough to afford a van and travel the country. The position required a 3-year commitment minimum. 16. Sarah walked into the conference room with confidence, shook hands with the interviewer, and immediately called him David. His name was Michael. She corrected herself and called him Daniel. Still wrong. When he gently reminded her of his actual name, she laughed and said, "Close enough, right, boss?" The interview lasted 3 more uncomfortable minutes. 17. Marcus thought he was being refreshingly honest when he casually mentioned getting fired from his last 3 jobs. What started as a simple question about his work history turned into a detailed confession about arguments with supervisors, attendance issues, and that time he accidentally started a small office fire while microwaving leftover pizza. The interviewer's eyebrows climbed higher with each termination story. Marcus seemed genuinely surprised that sharing these workplace disasters wasn't helping his case. He even laughed while describing how his former boss called him unemployable during their final confrontation. Then there's the part where he blamed everyone except himself. According to Marcus, every firing was completely unfair. His managers were idiots, his co-workers were jealous, and the companies just didn't appreciate his creative approach to following rules. But here's the kicker: he hadn't learned anything from these experiences. When asked what he'd do differently, Marcus shrugged and said he'd probably handle things the same way. After all, he reasoned, standing up for yourself is more important than keeping a job. The interviewer politely ended the meeting early. Marcus left wondering why companies always seem to hire the wrong people instead of someone with his obvious potential and refreshing honesty about past workplace challenges. 18. Sarah walked into the interview feeling confident. Then the hiring manager asked about her previous role at TechCorp. "Oh, I actually made that up," she laughed. "Most of my resume is fake. I figured you'd never check. Is honesty really that important here anyway?" 19. Sarah thought she was interviewing at Microsoft. She wasn't. She walked into Apple's headquarters and spent 15 minutes explaining her passion for Windows software. The receptionist tried to correct her twice. Sarah insisted she had the right place. When security finally intervened, she blamed her GPS for the obvious mistake. 20. Sarah walked into the marketing interview ready to discuss her passion for photography and her award-winning nature photos. She spent 15 minutes explaining her camera equipment and darkroom techniques. The interviewer kept trying to redirect the conversation to digital advertising strategies, but Sarah insisted her artistic eye would somehow translate to social media campaigns. She couldn't explain how. 21. Sarah walked into the retail interview confident and ready. Then the hiring manager mentioned the uniform policy. "Oh no," she said, her face dropping. "I'm allergic to polyester blends." The manager explained most retail uniforms contain synthetic materials. Sarah insisted she needed cotton-only clothing to avoid breaking out in hives. The conversation took an awkward turn when Sarah started listing her extensive textile sensitivities. Wool made her itch. Rayon caused rashes. Even certain cotton blends triggered reactions. She pulled out her phone to show photos of previous allergic reactions from work clothes. The interviewer shifted uncomfortably as Sarah scrolled through pictures of red, irritated skin. But here's where things got really weird. Sarah demanded the company create a custom uniform just for her. She wanted them to source special hypoallergenic fabrics and have them tailored to her measurements. When the manager mentioned this might not be feasible for a part-time sales position, Sarah got defensive. She accused them of discrimination and threatened to file complaints. The final nail in the coffin, Sarah suggested the entire store switch to her preferred fabric choices. She claimed other employees would benefit from more breathable materials. She even offered to research suppliers and negotiate pricing for the company. The manager politely ended the interview, explaining they'd be in touch. Sarah never heard back. 22. The hiring manager asks, "Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" The candidate stares blankly. Working somewhere, I guess. That's it. No ambition, no goals, no vision. They haven't thought past tomorrow's lunch. Career planning? What's that? Pure interview suicide. 23. Sarah walked into her interview confident and ready. The hiring manager asked about her experience working in teams. "I prefer working alone," she announced proudly. "Group projects are just other people slowing me down." She explained how she actively avoided collaborative work and skipped team meetings whenever possible. But here's where it gets really awkward. When the interviewer mentioned their open office layout and team-based projects, Sarah actually laughed. "That sounds terrible," she said. "Can I get my own office? I don't really do the whole teamwork thing." The hiring manager's face said it all. The worst part, Sarah thought she was being honest and authentic. She genuinely believed that admitting her preference for solo work would somehow impress them. Instead, she just eliminated herself from a job that required constant collaboration. Makes sense why that interview ended quickly, right? 24. Sarah thought showing her TikTok dance videos would impress the hiring manager. She pulled out her phone mid-interview, explaining how her viral content proved she was creative and engaging. The interviewer watched awkwardly as Sarah demonstrated her most popular moves, completely missing the point of professionalism. 25. Sarah walked into the interview with confidence. Then she opened her mouth. "I need someone to push me to get things done," she announced with a grin. The hiring manager's eyebrows shot up. Who admits they can't motivate themselves? Sarah doubled down, explaining how she preferred playing mobile games during work hours. She laughed about needing constant reminders to complete basic tasks. "I'm just not naturally driven," she said proudly. The interviewer wondered if this was some kind of test. But Sarah kept going. She described her ideal workplace as one where managers would basically babysit her through every project. No initiative required on her part. When asked about deadlines, Sarah shrugged. "Someone else usually handles that stuff for me." The interview ended quickly. Sarah never understood why she didn't get the job. 26. Marcus thought he had cracked the code. Walking into his interview at a tech startup, he launched into a passionate speech about how the current administration was ruining small businesses. The hiring manager nodded politely, while Marcus explained his theories about government overreach, completely missing her increasingly uncomfortable expression. But Marcus was just getting started. He pivoted to discussing how certain political figures were obviously corrupt and how anyone who disagreed was clearly misinformed. The interviewer tried redirecting the conversation back to his qualifications, but Marcus steamrolled right over her attempts. Then came the kicker. When she mentioned the company's recent partnership with a local nonprofit, Marcus scoffed and said their cause was just liberal propaganda. He actually used air quotes. The woman across from him happened to sit on that nonprofit's board. The weirdest part? Marcus genuinely believed he was building rapport. He kept saying things like, "I'm sure you agree with me, and we're on the same page here, right?" Meanwhile, his interviewer was mentally calculating how quickly she could end this train wreck. Some candidates forget that interviews aren't political rallies. They treat hiring managers like drinking buddies who want to hear their hot takes on current events. But here's the thing. Nobody asked for your stance on tax policy when you applied for a marketing position. Marcus left feeling confident about his honest conversation. The company, they had their answer before he reached the parking lot. Politics and job interviews mix about as well as gasoline and matches. 27. The candidate leaned forward with genuine curiosity and asked when the company's drug testing happened, not whether they tested. When, they wanted the exact schedule so they could plan accordingly. Then they bragged about passing any drug test like it was a special skill on their resume. 28. Sarah walked into her dream job interview feeling confident. The hiring manager started explaining the company's new quarterly goals. Sarah's phone buzzed. She answered it mid-sentence. "Hold on," she told the interviewer, then spent 5 minutes discussing dinner plans with her roommate while the professional sat there stunned. But that wasn't even the worst part. When she finally hung up, Sarah looked at her watch and sighed loudly. "Can we wrap this up soon? I have a yoga class at 4. The interviewer tried to continue with standard questions about her experience. Sarah kept checking her phone, typing responses to texts, and at one point actually shushed the interviewer when another call came through. Then there's the classic move of cutting people off entirely. Mike thought he was being efficient by finishing the interviewer's sentences. "So you're asking about my weaknesses?" "Yeah, I don't really have any." "Next question?" He'd interrupt every attempt at follow-up questions, wave his hand dismissively, and say things like, Yeah, I get it. Moving on." The weirdest part is how some candidates treat professional conversations like casual hangouts. Jessica brought her morning coffee and kept slurping loudly during the interview. Every time the hiring manager paused to think, she'd jump in with "So are we good here?" or "This is taking forever, right?" She even had the audacity to suggest they should speed things up because she had other interviews that day. 29. Sarah walked into her dream job interview carrying a full McDonald's meal. She unwrapped her Big Mac mid-conversation, offered fries to the stunned hiring manager, and answered questions between bites. The ketchup stain on her resume somehow seemed fitting for this unforgettable disaster. 30. Jake walked into his dream job interview wearing flip-flops and a wrinkled t-shirt that read, "I'm not lazy, I'm energy efficient." When the hiring manager politely mentioned their business casual dress code, Jake laughed and said professional clothes were just corporate propaganda to control people's creativity. The interviewer tried to redirect the conversation back to Jake's qualifications, but he was too busy explaining why ties were instruments of oppression and how his casual outfit showed he was authentic and real. He genuinely believed that showing up in pajama pants demonstrated his confidence and individuality. But here's the thing about first impressions, they happen in about 7 seconds. Jake had already lost the job before he even sat down. The company wasn't asking him to wear a tuxedo to answer phones. They just wanted someone who understood that different situations call for different levels of effort and respect. 31. Sarah walked into the marketing interview ready to impress. When asked about her previous experience, she launched into a detailed story about managing a restaurant kitchen during rush hour. The interviewer waited patiently, then asked how cooking related to digital advertising. Sarah paused, looked confused, and said she thought all jobs were basically the same. She then shared an unrelated story about winning a high school spelling bee, claiming it proved she was detail-oriented. But here's the thing about irrelevant stories, they reveal more than people think. They show a candidate can't connect experiences to new situations. Sarah spent 20 minutes talking about everything except marketing, advertising, or customer engagement. When pressed for relevant examples, she admitted she'd never actually worked in marketing before. The interviewer asked why she applied for the position. Sarah shrugged and said the job posting mentioned creative thinking and she considered herself creative because she once painted her bedroom walls. That's when the interview officially went off the rails. 32. Sarah walked into the tech startup interview carrying a smoothie and confidently announced she loved their amazing coffee products. The hiring manager stared blankly. This was a software company that had never sold coffee. She then praised their incredible retail stores. Midas Ecclesiret. They were entirely online. Sarah had somehow confused them with Starbucks and Amazon combined. 33. Money talks, but this candidate screamed it from the rooftops. They waltzed into the interview with dollar signs in their eyes and nothing else on their mind. The first question wasn't about company culture or growth opportunities. It was straight up, what's the pay? Before the interviewer could even finish explaining the role, this person had already calculated their monthly budget. They dismissed every question about helping customers or contributing to the team. "That's nice, but how much do I get paid?" became their broken record response. When asked about company values, they laughed. "Values don't pay my rent." They refused to discuss any responsibilities that didn't come with immediate financial rewards. Training, only if it meant a pay bump. Team meetings, waste of time, unless there was overtime involved. The interviewer tried explaining how the role could lead to career advancement, but they cut them off. "I just want to know my hourly rate." They even bragged about turning down other jobs that offered too much responsibility for too little money. 34. Marcus thought he was being clever when he bragged about creatively interpreting his previous company's expense policy. He He laughed while describing how he'd submit personal dinners as client meetings. The interviewer's face went pale when Marcus suggested their accounting department probably wouldn't notice similar creative bookkeeping either. 35. Sarah walked into the interview confident she'd nailed her research. The hiring manager asked about the role's key responsibilities. "Well, I figure I'll just learn as I go," she shrugged. When pressed for specifics from the job posting, she admitted she'd only read the salary range. Oops. 36. Sarah walked into her marketing interview 15 minutes late, then proudly announced she always waits until the last minute because it keeps things exciting. She bragged about missing 3 major project deadlines at her previous job but insisted the stress made her more creative. When asked about time management skills, she laughed and said deadlines were just suggestions anyway. 37. The candidate leaned forward with genuine curiosity and asked about the company's policy on workplace relationships. They wanted detailed information about dating coworkers and whether romantic relationships with supervisors were explicitly allowed or discouraged by management rules and regulations. 38. When the interviewer asks why you left your last job, saying it's complicated creates more problems than it solves. This vague response makes hiring managers think you're hiding something serious. Maybe you got fired for stealing office supplies or had a screaming match with your boss in front of customers. The mystery answer doesn't make you sound sophisticated or professional. It makes you look like someone who can't handle basic workplace situations or explain their own career decisions. Employers need real reasons, not dramatic soap opera responses that leave them guessing what actually happened. Well, here's the thing about job transitions. Everyone leaves jobs for specific reasons. Budget cuts, company closure, career growth, relocation, or yes, sometimes performance issues. But even negative situations can be explained professionally without making yourself look like a workplace disaster. Smart candidates prepare honest but tactful explanations. "The company restructured and eliminated my department" sounds way better than mysterious evasiveness. Even if you were fired, explaining what you learned from the experience shows maturity and growth rather than leaving interviewers to imagine the worst possible scenarios. 39. Sarah walked into the conference room confident about her interview. Then she casually mentioned suing her previous employer for unfair treatment. She detailed her ongoing lawsuit against another company too. "I'm pretty good at winning these legal battles," she laughed, completely missing the interviewer's horrified expression. The hiring manager quickly ended the meeting, realizing they dodged a major liability bullet. 40. Marcus walked into his interview carrying a flip phone from 2005. He proudly explained how he still used fax machines and refused to learn email. When asked about modern software, he laughed and said computers were just a fad that would pass soon enough. The hiring manager pulled out an iPad to show him the company's new app. Marcus squinted at the screen like he was looking at alien technology. He actually asked if they had a typewriter he could borrow instead. But here's where it gets really wild. Marcus started bragging about his old-school methods. He claimed handwritten letters were more authentic than digital communication. The interviewer tried explaining that clients expected instant responses, not week-long mail delays. Then Marcus dropped the real bombshell. He said he'd never owned a smartphone and didn't plan to start now. This was for a social media marketing position. The job literally required managing Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter accounts daily. The funniest part? Marcus kept calling the internet that computer thing. He genuinely believed people would eventually go back to doing everything on paper. When shown the company website, he suggested they print flyers instead. 41. Jake walked into the interview confident he'd nailed his research. The hiring manager smiled and asked about his interest in their retail operations. Without missing a beat, Jake launched into his passion for their amazing software solutions. The awkward silence that followed was deafening. Wrong industry, wrong company, wrong everything. The interviewer gently corrected him, explaining they actually ran clothing stores. Jake's face went red as he realized he'd confused them with a tech startup he'd applied to last week. But instead of gracefully recovering, he doubled down and asked if they had any plans to pivot into software development. Then came the real kicker. Jake admitted he wasn't really into the whole retail thing anyway, and wondered if they needed any programmers. The hiring manager politely explained that no, their 1,000-employee retail chain wasn't looking to hire their first developer today. Jake left that interview faster than a Black Friday shopper grabbing the last TV on sale. 42. Sarah walked into the interview confident she'd nail it. The hiring manager introduced himself and explained the entry-level marketing assistant position. Sarah nodded along, then dropped her bombshell. When do I get promoted to department head? The interviewer blinked twice, clearly stunned by her audacity and complete disconnect from reality. 43. Sarah walked into her interview 15 minutes late, then immediately asked if they could wrap things up quickly because she had dinner plans. She answered her phone twice during the conversation, rolled her eyes when asked about her experience, and suggested the interviewer speak faster to save time. 44. Sarah walked into the tech startup interview and immediately started explaining why their mission statement was basically pointless. She rolled her eyes when the founder described their goals to reduce food waste. Who cares about saving leftovers? She laughed, completely missing the billion-dollar market opportunity. The interviewer tried explaining how their app helped restaurants donate surplus meals to food banks. Sarah interrupted with a dramatic yawn. She pulled out her phone and started scrolling through social media while muttering about do-gooder companies being too preachy for normal people. But here's where things got really awkward. When asked what attracted her to the company, Sarah shrugged and said she just needed any job that paid well. She admitted she hadn't even looked at their website beyond the salary posting. The company's award-winning sustainability program? Never heard of it. Then Sarah made her final mistake. She suggested the company would be way more successful if they focused on making money instead of helping poor people. The founder, who had started the company after volunteering at homeless shelters, quietly ended the interview 5 minutes later. 45. Marcus walked into his interview 15 minutes late, coffee still dripping from his shirt. When asked about the position, he confidently announced he was there for the marketing role. Problem was, he'd applied for accounting. The interviewer gently corrected him, but Marcus doubled down, insisting the job posting mentioned social media campaigns. 46. Walking into an interview without questions prepared is like showing up to a dinner party empty-handed. The interviewer asks what you want to know about the role or company. You shrug and say you're good. That silence screams disinterest louder than words ever could. 47. Sarah sat across from the hiring manager, confidence radiating from every pore. When asked about her college experience, she launched into a detailed explanation of how her professors were clearly incompetent and how the entire educational system had failed her. My grades were bad because teachers didn't understand my genius, she declared with absolute certainty. The interviewer pressed further, asking about specific courses. Sarah's eyes lit up as she described how she'd argued with her statistics professor about basic math principles. He marked my answers wrong, but I knew better, she insisted. The weird part, she couldn't actually explain what she thought the right answers were. Then there's the matter of responsibility. Sarah had perfected the art of deflecting blame onto everyone except herself. Her chemistry grades suffered because the lab equipment was obviously defective. Her English papers received poor marks because her professor didn't appreciate creative interpretation. Each excuse came with passionate conviction and zero self-reflection. But here's where it gets really interesting. Sarah genuinely believed she was demonstrating problem-solving skills by identifying all these external issues. In her mind, she was showing the interviewer how she could spot problems in any organization. The hiring manager watched in fascination as Sarah painted herself as a misunderstood intellectual surrounded by incompetent authority figures. 48. Sarah walked into her interview ready to discuss her career journey. Instead, she spent 20 minutes listing every job she'd ever been fired from. She detailed arguments with supervisors, policy violations, and workplace conflicts. The interviewer watched in horror as Sarah turned her interview into a confessional of professional disasters. 49. Sarah walked into the tech startup interview ready to impress. When the hiring manager explained their comprehensive 3-week training program, she laughed out loud. "Can't I just skip all that boring stuff and start working tomorrow?" she asked confidently. The manager's smile disappeared instantly. Training programs exist for good reasons. Companies invest thousands of dollars developing these systems because they work. New employees need to understand company culture, learn specific software, and grasp internal processes. But Sarah thought she knew better than decades of corporate wisdom. Her reasoning was simple yet flawed. "I've worked at other places before," she explained dismissively. How different could this job really be? She completely missed the point that every workplace operates uniquely. Different systems, different expectations, different ways of handling problems. The interviewer tried explaining their specialized customer management software. Sarah waved her hand dismissively. "I'll figure it out as I go," she insisted. Learning on the job is way more efficient than sitting through presentations. Her confidence was admirable but misplaced in this context. Then comes the safety concern aspect. This particular company handled sensitive client data requiring specific protocols. Skipping training meant potential legal violations, data breaches, and massive liability issues. Sarah didn't care about any of these critical details at all. The manager asked about her experience with their industry regulations. Regulations are just suggestions anyway. Sarah replied with a grin. Smart people find ways around unnecessary red tape. The room grew uncomfortably quiet as the interviewer realized this wasn't going well. But here's the truly baffling part. Sarah actually demanded they pay her full salary during any training period she couldn't avoid. If you absolutely insist on wasting my time with training, I expect normal wages, she stated firmly. The audacity was genuinely impressive. Companies use training to weed out problematic employees early. Sarah failed this test spectacularly before even getting hired. Her attitude screamed future problems with authority, learning, and basic workplace cooperation. The interview ended within minutes. 50. Sarah walked into the retail interview confidently. The hiring manager asked about her customer service philosophy. She leaned back and said, "Honestly, I can't stand customers. They're always complaining about stupid stuff." Then she added, "Most people are just annoying to deal with, you know." 51. Sarah walked into her marketing interview and immediately asked about the snack situation. Not the company culture, not growth opportunities. Snacks. She spent 10 minutes discussing the free coffee quality and whether they had her favorite granola bars. The interviewer tried redirecting to actual job duties, but Sarah kept circling back to kitchen amenities. She even negotiated for premium snacks as part of her compensation package. When asked about her marketing experience, she briefly mentioned social media but quickly shifted to discussing workplace vending machines. The weird part is she seemed genuinely surprised when they didn't call back. Some people think job perks matter more than job performance. Sarah took that philosophy and ran straight to the break room with it. 52. Marcus walked into his dream job interview and immediately asked for a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows. He wanted his own coffee machine, not the shared one in the break room. Then he demanded a parking spot closest to the building entrance. The interviewer hadn't even offered him the job yet. Marcus explained he needed a standing desk because sitting hurt his back. Fair enough, right? But then he wanted a massage chair too. He asked about getting his own personal assistant to handle emails. The position was for entry-level customer service. The salary was $32,000 a year. Well, Marcus wasn't done making demands. He wanted flexible hours, meaning he'd work whenever he felt like it. He needed Fridays off permanently for his yoga classes. The company should provide lunch every day, but not just any lunch. Gourmet meals from specific restaurants he liked. Then there's the technology requests. Marcus wanted the newest MacBook Pro, even though the job only required basic data entry. He demanded 2 monitors, a wireless keyboard, and noise-canceling headphones that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The interviewer started laughing, thinking it was a joke, but Marcus kept going. He wanted his own conference room for important calls, which were actually personal conversations with friends. He needed a mini fridge stocked with energy drinks. The company should pay for his gym membership because staying fit helps productivity. He asked about getting a company car, despite working in a call center. The interviewer finally interrupted. "Do you understand this is an entry-level position?" Marcus looked confused. He thought asking for special treatment showed ambition and confidence. Instead, he showed he had no idea how jobs actually work in the real world. 53. Sarah walked into her interview confident she'd land the job. When asked about her biggest strengths, she paused for 30 seconds. I don't really know what I'm good at," she admitted. The interviewer tried again, asking about specific skills from her resume. Sarah shrugged and said she couldn't remember writing most of it. Then came the classic question about her experience with customer service. "I guess I talked to people before," she offered weakly. The interviewer pressed for details about conflict resolution or difficult situations she'd handled. Sarah's response? "I've never really thought about that stuff." She couldn't explain her own work history, mixed up dates from jobs she'd supposedly held for years, and when asked about her greatest professional achievement, she went completely blank. The interview ended with Sarah asking if they could just tell her what her skills were so she'd know for next time. 54. Sarah walked into her dream job interview with confidence. Everything seemed perfect until she casually mentioned her exit strategy. "I'm really just looking for something temporary while I figure out my next move," she said cheerfully. The interviewer's smile disappeared instantly as Sarah continued explaining her plans to leave within 6 months. Then there's the classic case of Marcus, who thought honesty was always the best policy. He proudly told his potential employer about his habit of job hopping every year. "I get bored easily," he laughed, completely missing the horrified expression on the hiring manager's face. Makes sense, right? But the real kicker came when Jennifer decided to negotiate her departure before even getting hired. She asked about severance packages and resignation procedures during her first interview. The poor interviewer didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Well, at least she was thinking ahead, though perhaps a bit too far ahead for someone who hadn't even been offered the position yet. 55. Walking into an interview and immediately asking about promotion timelines? Bold move. One candidate actually demanded to know when they'd become a supervisor before even discussing the entry-level position. They refused to consider starting at the bottom, insisting their natural leadership abilities warranted immediate advancement opportunities. 56. Sarah walked into her 4th interview that month with confidence radiating from every step. The hiring manager asked about her work history, expecting to hear about steady career growth. Instead, Sarah launched into a detailed explanation of why she'd held 12 different jobs in the past 3 years. "I get bored really easily," she said with a laugh, completely missing the concerned look spreading across the interviewer's face. Each role lasted between 2 and 6 months before she decided to explore new opportunities. She treated job hopping like collecting stamps. The interviewer asked if she planned to stay longer if hired. Sarah shrugged and said staying anywhere more than a year felt like being trapped. She genuinely believed employers would find her diverse experience impressive rather than seeing it as a massive red flag about her commitment and reliability. 57. Jason thought office pranks built team spirit. Wrong. He bragged about putting plastic wrap on toilet seats and hiding coworkers' lunches. The interviewer's face went stone cold when Jason suggested pranking the CEO would be hilarious team bonding. Some boundaries shouldn't be crossed, especially in interviews. 58. Sarah walked into the accounting interview confident about her math skills. When asked to calculate a simple percentage, she froze completely. "I was never good with numbers," she admitted, laughing nervously. The interviewer stared in disbelief. This was for a finance position requiring daily calculations and budget analysis. 59. Walking into that interview room feeling confident, then admitting you've never actually tried the company's main product. That's exactly what happened here. The candidate spent 10 minutes explaining why they preferred the competitor's version instead. They even suggested the company should try harder to make something people actually want. Talk about missing the point completely. 60. Sarah walked into the tech startup interview feeling confident. When asked about her personality, she immediately responded, "I'm not really a team player. I don't like people much." The interviewer's face froze. She continued, "I work better alone and honestly prefer avoiding coworkers completely." 61. Social media posts can sink your career before it even starts. One candidate proudly showed their TikTok account during the interview, featuring videos of them drunk at parties and making inappropriate jokes. They laughed about going viral for all the wrong reasons. The hiring manager wasn't impressed by their 15 minutes of fame built on questionable content. 62. Walking into an interview and immediately asking about leaving early shows exactly where your priorities lie. Sarah wanted flexible hours, minimal overtime, and the option to duck out whenever she felt like it. She spent 20 minutes negotiating work-from-home days before anyone mentioned actual job duties. The hiring manager watched her basically interview them about how little she'd need to work. When asked about her availability, Sarah laughed and said she preferred banker's hours but shorter. She wanted full-time pay for part-time effort. The real kicker? She asked if arriving late meant she could stay late instead, treating the schedule like a suggestion rather than a requirement. 63. Career gaps happen to everyone. Life gets messy sometimes. But when the interviewer asks about that 6-month break on your resume, you need an answer. One candidate just stared at the wall when asked about their employment gap. They refused to explain anything. Complete silence. 64. Sarah walked into the tech startup interview wearing flip-flops and gym shorts. When asked about her work ethic, she shrugged and said, I don't really like working hard. Can't I just do the easy stuff?" The hiring manager's jaw dropped as she continued explaining how she preferred jobs where she could coast along without much effort. 65. Sarah walked into her interview confident she'd nail every question. 20 minutes later, she blamed her previous manager for literally everything that went wrong in her career. Traffic was late because of her boss. The coffee machine broke because her supervisor didn't fix it fast enough. Her project failed because management didn't give her enough support, even though she admitted she never asked for help. When the interviewer asked about a specific mistake on her resume, Sarah immediately pointed fingers at her team lead for not explaining things clearly. She even blamed her boss for her own typos in emails. The interviewer watched in amazement as Sarah managed to turn every single professional challenge into someone else's fault. She couldn't take responsibility for anything. Not missing deadlines, not communication problems, not even showing up late to work. According to Sarah, her boss was the root of all workplace evil. The funny thing, she wanted a promotion at her current job but couldn't understand why they kept passing her over. 66. Walking into an interview and immediately asking about salary increases shows employers you're already planning your financial exit strategy. Sarah wanted to know about quarterly raises before learning what the job actually involved. She negotiated annual pay bumps during the handshake introduction, completely skipping any discussion about performance or company goals. The hiring manager barely finished explaining the role when Sarah interrupted with questions about merit-based salary reviews. She demanded a timeline for her first raise and asked if the company offered annual cost of living adjustments. Her focus stayed locked on money instead of demonstrating why she deserved any compensation at all. Then Sarah made it worse by comparing their raise structure to her previous jobs. She criticized companies that didn't offer automatic salary increases and suggested their current pay scale seemed outdated. The interviewer watched her prioritize personal finances over contributing value to the team or understanding basic job responsibilities. 67. Sarah walked into the tech startup interview confident she'd landed her dream marketing role. Halfway through discussing campaign strategies, she casually mentioned her real passion was opening a bakery within 2 years. The hiring manager's face went blank. "So this position is just temporary for you?" Sarah nodded enthusiastically, completely missing the problem. 68. The interviewer pulls out a basic skills test. Simple stuff, maybe some typing, basic math, or industry knowledge questions. Nothing crazy. But this candidate, they cross their arms and shake their head like someone just asked them to donate a kidney. "I'm not taking any tests," they announce with the confidence of someone who clearly hasn't thought this through. 69. Sarah walked into her dream job interview with confidence. Then she made one fatal mistake that destroyed everything in seconds. During the hiring manager's first question, she rolled her eyes so dramatically that everyone in the room noticed. Her face showed pure annoyance at basic questions about her experience and skills, completely ruining any chance of getting hired. 70. Sarah walked into the interview, confident about landing her dream marketing job. 20 minutes later, she was explaining how she'd failed at 3 identical marketing positions in the past year. Each story was worse than the last. Missed campaigns, angry clients, confused strategies. The interviewer's expression shifted from interest to concern as Sarah detailed every mistake without mentioning a single lesson learned or improvement made. But here's the kicker, she wasn't sharing these failures to show growth or resilience. Sarah seemed genuinely puzzled why previous companies didn't appreciate her creative approach. She described missing major product launches as timing issues and losing key clients as personality clashes. The interviewer asked what she'd do differently this time. Sarah's response? Probably the same thing, but maybe they'll like it better here. She genuinely believed the problem was with every other company, not her approach. When pressed about specific improvements, she laughed and said she was pretty much perfect at marketing, just unlucky with employers. The interview ended shortly after that gem. 71. Walking into an interview without checking the company website is like showing up to a dinner party asking what food they're serving. One candidate confidently stated facts about a tech company that were completely wrong. They mixed up the founding year by a decade. They couldn't name a single product the company actually made. The interviewer watched in amazement as this person described services the company had never offered. When asked about recent company news, the candidate shrugged and said they didn't have time for research. This wasn't just laziness. It was a masterclass in how to torpedo your chances before the first question. But here's the kicker, they seemed proud of winging it. They actually bragged about not needing to prepare because they were naturally good with people. The company website had everything they needed to know. Mission statement, recent achievements, team photos, even a blog with industry insights. Instead, they chose to gamble with guesswork. The result? 15 minutes of painful silence as the interviewer realized this person knew absolutely nothing about where they wanted to work. Makes you wonder how they even found the job posting. Right? 72. Sarah walked into what she thought was her dream job interview. Everything seemed perfect until she opened her mouth. "I love how your company used to care about customers back in the old days," she announced confidently. "Those were the good times before everything went downhill, right?" The interviewer's face went blank. Here was someone criticizing decades of company growth, innovation, and progress. Sarah continued digging her hole deeper. She talked about how the founder had better vision than current leadership. She mentioned reading old articles about when the company actually mattered. But here's what makes this so absurd. Sarah was applying to work for a company she openly disrespected. She spent 15 minutes explaining how previous executives made better decisions. The current CEO, apparently not as smart as his predecessor, according to Sarah's expert analysis. Then she got creative with her historical criticism. She brought up a minor controversy from 8 years ago that most employees had forgotten. Sarah treated it like yesterday's breaking news. The interviewer had to explain how the company had grown, improved, and learned from past challenges. The weird part is Sarah seemed genuinely confused when the interview ended quickly. She thought sharing honest feedback about company history would impress them. Instead, she showed complete disrespect for the organization she wanted to join. Why would any company hire someone who starts by insulting their journey? 73. Sarah walked into the interview room with confidence. She shook hands firmly and sat down with a bright smile. When the interviewer asked why she wanted to work there, Sarah paused. Her face went blank. "So, what exactly does this company do again?" she asked cheerfully. The interviewer's expression shifted from professional to puzzled. This wasn't uncommon, but it always caught them off guard. Sarah had somehow made it through the application process without understanding the basic business model. She nodded eagerly as they explained their software development services, pretending this was all brand new information. Then came the follow-up question about which products interested her most. Sarah's eyes darted around the room, searching for clues. "Well, all of them really," she said vaguely. "I love technology stuff." The interviewer realized Sarah had zero knowledge about their actual work, their clients, or even their industry focus. 74. Sarah walked into her interview, confident she'd nailed her research. When asked about her biggest strength, she said leadership. 20 minutes later, she described herself as someone who works best alone. The interviewer asked about teamwork experience. "I prefer individual projects," Sarah replied. Then she wondered why they looked confused. Her answers kept flip-flopping, like a politician during election season. 75. Marcus walked into his interview confident and ready. The hiring manager asked about his previous work experience. "Well, I used to deal drugs in college," he said casually. "Made decent money too. Nothing too serious, just marijuana and some pills. Great customer service skills though, right?" The room went dead silent. The interviewer's pen stopped moving. Marcus realized his mistake, but kept digging deeper. "I mean, it taught me about inventory management and building client relationships," he added with a nervous laugh. Then there's the follow-up question about any legal issues. "Oh yeah, got arrested twice, but the charges were dropped," Marcus explained. Technically not convicted of anything. He seemed genuinely confused why this wasn't impressive. The weird part is he thought honesty would help his case. Some candidates believe sharing illegal activities shows authenticity or real-world experience. But here's what actually happens: instant disqualification. Companies run background checks anyway. Admitting to crimes during interviews just speeds up the rejection process. Makes sense, right? Why would any employer risk hiring someone who openly discusses breaking laws? 76. Sarah walked into the marketing firm interview buzzing about their upcoming holiday party. She asked detailed questions about office celebrations, team happy hours, and whether they had karaoke nights. When asked about her marketing experience, she shrugged and said the fun stuff mattered more than boring work tasks. 77. When asked to provide examples of their leadership skills, Sarah just stared. The interviewer tried again. "Tell me about a time you solved a problem at work." More silence. Sarah finally shrugged and said, "I'm really good at stuff. I just can't think of any right now." 78. Some candidates actually show up to interviews and announce they don't care about diversity. They'll laugh at inclusion programs or say it doesn't matter to me when asked about working with different backgrounds. The really bold ones will openly communicate disrespect for diversity initiatives, completely missing how this reflects their character and professional judgment. 79. Sarah walked into the tech startup interview confident and prepared. When asked about the company's mission, she proudly declared they were pioneers in sustainable fashion. The interviewer's confused expression said it all. The company developed cybersecurity software. She had memorized the wrong company's values completely. 80. Sarah walked into Microsoft's headquarters wearing her lucky interview outfit. 30 minutes later, she confidently told the hiring manager about her excitement to work at Apple. The silence that followed could have powered a small city. When gently corrected, she doubled down, insisting she'd researched this Apple company thoroughly. 81. Sarah walked into her interview ready to impress. She had practiced her elevator pitch for hours. The hiring manager asked about her greatest professional achievement. Sarah's eyes lit up as she launched into a detailed story about winning first place in her neighborhood salsa dancing competition last summer. She described every spin, dip, and dramatic flourish with passionate enthusiasm. The interviewer waited patiently, expecting Sarah to connect this victory to workplace skills. Maybe she'd talk about dedication, practice, or performing under pressure. Instead, Sarah continued explaining her dance costume and how many people cheered. She never mentioned teamwork, leadership, or problem-solving abilities that might transfer to the marketing role. When prompted to relate this experience to the job, Sarah looked confused. She genuinely believed that winning a dance contest proved she was qualified to manage social media campaigns. The disconnect was stunning. Her personal achievement was impressive in its own context, but it had zero relevance to professional capabilities. This happens more often than you'd think. Candidates share stories about cooking contests, video game tournaments, or high school sports victories. They get so excited about their personal wins that they forget the interviewer needs workplace examples. The key is showing how your experiences demonstrate job-relevant skills, not just listing random accomplishments. 82. When asked about handling workplace disagreements, this candidate went completely silent. Not thoughtful silence. Panic silence. They shifted in their chair, looked at the ceiling, then finally mumbled something about just avoiding drama. The interviewer pressed for specifics about resolving team conflicts. The response, "I don't really do confrontation." Then came the classic deflection move. Instead of explaining how they'd handled disputes professionally, they launched into stories about coworkers who always caused problems. Every workplace conflict in their history was someone else's fault. The difficult customer, unreasonable. The demanding supervisor, impossible to please. But here's where it got really interesting. They couldn't name a single time they'd successfully worked through a disagreement. Not one example of compromise, mediation, or finding common ground. When the interviewer asked about communication strategies, they looked genuinely confused. Why would I need strategies? I just stay out of it. The final nail came when they proudly announced their go-to conflict resolution method: walking away. Literally just leaving the room when things got tense. They thought this showed maturity. The interviewer thought it showed someone who'd abandoned ship the moment workplace stress appeared. 83. Sarah walked into her retail interview and immediately started laughing about the time she accidentally left a wet floor sign where her manager would slip. She thought workplace pranks built team spirit. The interviewer watched in horror as she described putting plastic wrap over toilet seats and hiding coworkers' lunch from the office refrigerator daily. Sarah didn't see the problem with her creative approach to workplace fun. She'd once replaced all the pens in the supply closet with crayons during a busy sales period. Her previous boss called it sabotage, but she called it keeping morale high. The best prank involved switching everyone's computer backgrounds to embarrassing childhood photos she'd found on social media. Then there was the time she convinced new employees that casual Friday meant pajamas were acceptable. 3 people showed up in bathrobes before management intervened. Sarah giggled through the entire story, completely missing the interviewer's increasingly uncomfortable expressions. She genuinely believed her pranking skills would make her an asset to any workplace environment. The interviewer asked how pranks related to customer service excellence. Sarah's response, "Well, customers love a good laugh too." She'd apparently once told a customer their returned item smelled like her ex-boyfriend's gym socks. Management wasn't amused, but Sarah thought she was building authentic customer relationships through humor and honesty. 84. Called onboarding boring and refused to attend workshops? That's exactly what happened during this retail interview. The candidate laughed when told about mandatory training sessions. They bragged about learning everything on the job instead, professional development, complete waste of time, according to them. They preferred shortcuts over proper preparation. 85. The candidate looked at the job requirements and actually laughed out loud. You really need a college degree for this? They said, shaking their head like the interviewer was joking. They bragged about getting by without any formal training and dismissed the need for certifications or skill building. 86. John walked into the tech startup interview carrying a flip phone and proudly announced he doesn't trust computers. The hiring manager stared as John explained email was too complicated and suggested they communicate through handwritten letters. When shown the company's advanced software system, John laughed and asked if they had any typewriters available instead. 87. Sarah thought sharing workplace drama would make her relatable. Wrong move. She launched into detailed stories about heated arguments with coworkers, complete with raised voices and slammed doors. The interviewer watched uncomfortably as Sarah reenacted confrontations, seemingly proud of her aggressive responses to workplace disagreements. 88. Sarah walked into Microsoft and spent 10 minutes talking about how excited she was to work for Apple. When the interviewer politely corrected her, she doubled down and insisted they were basically the same company anyway. She then asked if they made phones too, completely missing the point that she'd researched the wrong tech giant entirely. 89. Sarah walked into her dream job interview ready to impress. First question about company policies? She burst out laughing. Those attendance rules are ridiculous, she declared, waving her hand dismissively. The interviewer's face went blank. Sarah continued mocking their dress code, calling safety protocols totally unnecessary, and suggesting they loosen up a bit. Her laughter echoed through the silent room. 90. Sarah walked into the tech startup's sleek office, completely prepared. Well, almost completely. She knew the interviewer's name, had researched the company's latest product launch, and even practiced common interview questions. But when asked what drew her to the company, something unexpected happened. She completely blanked on the company's reputation. Honestly, I haven't really looked into what people say about working here, she admitted with a shrug. The interviewer's eyebrows shot up. Most candidates at least pretend to care about company culture or employee satisfaction ratings. Sarah doubled down instead of recovering. I mean, reviews are just opinions, right? The hiring manager tried steering the conversation back. What matters most to you in a workplace environment? Sarah's response made things worse. I guess I'll find out when I start. She wasn't trying to be difficult. She genuinely believed that online reviews and company reputation didn't matter much. But here's what Sarah missed completely. Companies spend millions building their employer brand for good reason. They want people who actively chose them, not someone who stumbled in accidentally. Her indifference sent a clear message. This job was just another paycheck to her. The interview ended politely enough. Sarah left thinking she'd been refreshingly honest. The company, however, had already moved on to candidates who actually wanted to work there specifically. Sometimes caring about reputation isn't shallow. It's smart. 91. Sarah walked into her dream job interview at 25, already planning her golden years. Before the hiring manager could finish introducing herself, Sarah interrupted with retirement questions. What's the 401k match percentage? When do pension benefits kick in? How many years until full retirement eligibility? The interviewer blinked twice, wondering if she'd accidentally called the wrong candidate. The hiring manager tried redirecting the conversation back to the actual job duties. Sarah wasn't having it. She pulled out a calculator and started computing retirement scenarios based on different salary ranges. If I start at $40,000, invest 12% annually with a 7% return, I could retire by 58, she announced proudly. The position was entry-level marketing coordinator. What makes this particularly mind-boggling is the complete disconnect from reality. Sarah hadn't even been offered the job yet, but she was already mentally spending her retirement savings. She demanded detailed explanations about healthcare benefits for retirees, survivor benefits, and early withdrawal penalties. The interviewer kept trying to explain the role's responsibilities, but Sarah kept steering back to her financial future. The interview lasted exactly 12 minutes. Sarah spent 11 of those minutes discussing retirement planning strategies and asking whether the company offered financial advisory services for long-term employees. She never asked about the team she'd work with, the projects she'd handle, or what success looked like in the role. Her priority was crystal clear. 92. Sarah thought missing work occasionally was normal until it became her downfall. She'd disappear for days without calling in, leaving teammates scrambling to cover her shifts. During her next job interview, she casually mentioned getting fired twice for the same pattern, laughing like it was no big deal whatsoever. 93. Sarah walked into Microsoft thinking she was interviewing at Apple. When the HR manager introduced himself, she asked if he was Tim Cook's assistant. The confusion deepened when she started discussing iPhone features. 30 minutes later, she still hadn't figured out where she actually was or who was sitting across from her. The interviewer tried dropping hints about Windows and Office software. Sarah nodded enthusiastically while explaining her passion for Mac products. She even pulled out her iPhone to show relevant apps. The poor hiring manager watched in disbelief as this candidate pitched herself for a completely different company. But here's the kicker, when he finally corrected her, Sarah didn't miss a beat. She claimed she always gets those two mixed up and asked if they could start over. The interviewer politely explained that might not be possible. Sarah then asked if he could recommend her to Apple instead, since she was already warmed up. 94. Some candidates think rules are just suggestions. One person actually bragged about skipping half the application process because they knew someone. They laughed when told about required background checks. Then they mentioned how they always find shortcuts at work. The interviewer wondered what other corners they'd cut if hired. 95. Sarah walked into her dream job interview feeling confident. The moment difficult questions started flying, she crumbled completely. "I don't know," became her standard response to everything. When asked about problem-solving skills, she shrugged. When pressed about experience, she gave up entirely without even trying to think. 96. The candidate walked in carrying printouts from Glassdoor and Indeed reviews. Asked if the company's 3.2-star rating was accurate before discussing the actual job. Spent 15 minutes comparing online complaints to other employers. Wanted to know why former employees left negative feedback, completely ignored the hiring manager's questions about qualifications and experience. 97. Sarah walked into her performance review confident she'd nailed everything. Her manager started giving constructive feedback about improving her presentation skills. Sarah immediately cut him off. "Feedback doesn't matter to me," she said, with a shrug. "I'm already perfect at my job. Why would I need anyone else's opinion?" The room went silent. Her manager tried again, explaining how the feedback could help her advance to the leadership role she'd been wanting. Sarah rolled her eyes dramatically. "That's your opinion. I disagree completely." She crossed her arms and leaned back in her chair like she'd just won an argument. But here's the thing about feedback. It's literally how people grow in their careers. Companies invest in managers who can coach their teams. They promote people who show they can learn and adapt. Sarah was basically telling her boss she was unteachable. The manager pulled out specific examples from recent projects. Client complaints. Missed deadlines. Sarah's response? Those clients don't know what they're talking about. She wasn't just dismissing feedback, she was dismissing the very people the company served. Then came the coaching suggestions, training programs, mentorship opportunities. Sarah laughed them all off like they were jokes. "I don't need coaching," she announced. "I've been doing this job fine without anyone's help." The irony was thick. She was sitting in a review meeting because her performance needed improvement. The weird part? Sarah seemed genuinely confused when she didn't get the promotion she wanted. She'd literally rejected every tool that could have helped her succeed. Makes sense, right? You can't grow if you won't listen. 98. The candidate walked into the interview and immediately asked, "Can I take 2 weeks off next month? I already booked a cruise." Before even discussing the job duties or company expectations, they demanded vacation time. The interviewer explained that new employees typically need to complete training first. The candidate rolled their eyes and said they couldn't possibly cancel their trip. 99. The candidate kept passing the buck on everything. "That project failed because my team didn't listen. Sales dropped because customers were unreasonable. I missed deadlines because my manager gave unclear instructions." When asked about personal accountability, they shrugged and said responsibility was overrated anyway. 100. Sarah walked into the tech startup interview carrying a folder of documents. Everything seemed normal until she opened her mouth. "Thanks for meeting with me about the marketing position at..." She paused, looking confused. "Wait, What company is this again? The interviewer's smile froze. Sarah had forgotten she was interviewing at Dataflow Solutions, not the consulting firm she'd visited yesterday. But here's the weird part, she didn't even try to recover gracefully. Instead, she laughed and said, "I've been to so many interviews this week, they all blur together." The hiring manager watched in disbelief as Sarah pulled out notes from 3 different companies, shuffling through them like playing cards. Then Sarah made it worse by asking, "So what exactly do you guys do here?" "Software stuff." This wasn't just a simple mix-up anymore. Dataflow Solutions had been featured in major tech publications for months. Their logo was literally on the wall behind the interviewer. Sarah's complete lack of preparation wasn't charming or relatable. It screamed that she didn't value their time enough to spend 5 minutes researching basic company information before showing up. 101. Walking out of an interview without saying thank you is like leaving someone's house after dinner and slamming the door. Yet candidates do this constantly. They finish answering the last question, grab their stuff, and bolt for the exit. No handshake, no appreciation, just gone. The interviewer sits there wondering what just happened. Did they offend this person somehow? Was the interview that terrible? Meanwhile, the candidate thinks they're being efficient. They're actually being rude. Basic manners matter more than most people realize in professional settings. A simple thank you for your time can separate you from dozens of other applicants who forgot this elementary courtesy. Then there's the complete opposite problem. Some candidates get so nervous they start rambling thank yous like broken records. "Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you for considering me. Thank you for your time. Thank you for breathing in my general direction." But the worst offense isn't overthanking. It's treating the interviewer like they're invisible once the formal questions end. These candidates shift into autopilot mode, mentally already out the door before their body catches up. Professional courtesy isn't complicated. You shake hands, make eye contact, express genuine appreciation, and leave on a positive note. Yet somehow this basic human interaction trips up otherwise intelligent people. The interviewer remembers how you enter a room and how you leave it. Everything in between could be perfect, but if you exit like you're fleeing a crime scene, that's the lasting impression.